we're at the height of the silly season, and we're coming down to very short time before you get to decide who will be setting policies for Milford for the next 3 years, one of the three. As always, not our place to ask you to vote for any specific candidate, but we'll beg you to get to know the candidates. Whether you watch this show, Kevin Rudden and Al Holman show, you go to the senior center, there's plenty of times to really get to know each of the candidates and what they stand for. So tonight, let's start with an introduction.
Thank you, Al. John Erickson here, candidate for Selectman. Some of my background, lifelong Milford resident, went through Milford Public Schools, graduated WPI in 1990, and then went into our family business, Erickson Electric, which I am still involved in and run today. In the past 15 years, I've worked extensively in town government. I worked first as the building inspector and then as the building commissioner and a department head for the town of Milford, combined for about 14 years between the two positions. And then most recently, as you know, I've been serving the last 3 years as an elected member of the school committee. And it's a combination of my life experiences, but really what I've learned about town government, working on the inside, being a department head at town hall, working with other department heads extensively, that has given me an insight that I think is invaluable, will be invaluable if I am fortunate enough to serve as the selectman. So I think when you look at, my body of experiences, that I really can contribute a lot to this board.
And?
Thank you, Al. Will Kincaid, current chairman of the Board of Selectmen and up for re-election, and thank you, John, as well. I've served the last 3 years as selectman here in Milford. Prior to that, I served 2 years on the Finance Committee, 9 years on the School Committee, which I really enjoyed, 4 years on the Housing Authority, town meeting member since I was about 18 or 19 years old. I don't remember exactly, but I've been around a long time. I really enjoy serving. I hope to be re-elected. I think I've done a good job. I think I'm responsive to my phone calls and my emails. I think I do a pretty good job of representing what I think is important to the folks here in Milford. And I'm looking forward to our discussions going forward. I'm lucky enough that John and I have known each other a very long time. We know each other's families. And so far, I can't say anything but positive things about my opponent, as well as the fact that this whole campaign so far.
So John, I guess I'm becoming predictable because you already know my first question. But I'm going to ask you, and if you want to add anything to your intro, please feel free. John, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, I think it's the insight and the experience that I bring from my past experiences. Again, as a business owner, as a full-time department head for the town of Milford, I have a view of the town, the state of the town, an idea of what our other department heads need for support that I just don't think many candidates, or even those who have been in public service for many years, have as thorough an understanding of. It's this municipal experience, this insight, that I think differentiates me from a typical candidate for selectman. It's having lived there full time for a number of years. In addition, I've made decisions that affect the town of Milford, that reflect the town of Milford for many years, decisions that have not always been easy, decisions that have far-reaching implications if you make the wrong decision and can't justify it. And I think it's that experience, along with my disposition, my personality, and my independence, that makes me a candidate that you can support to be your next selectman.
Well, I can't say Willie. Will.
Yes.
I'm from Milford. I'm trying to be proper. Why should I vote for you?
No, thank you, Al. I think pretty much what I said in my introduction, I think stands true. I think I've had an aggressive agenda over the last 3 years. I certainly don't shy away from decision making, even when it could bring criticism. I think when you get elected to a position like selectman, or much like being a school committee member, you have to be prepared to make decisions and have the repercussions, but that's why people send us there. I think of it very simply, that you present your agenda when you're running for election. People vote for you or they don't, And if they do vote for you and you get elected, that is your homework assignment. That agenda is what you told the folks that you were going to work on and move forward with. And you need to do it aggressively and efficiently, and then I think you live with those decisions. But most people, I think, support the decisions that you make because they knew the agenda that you set when you said it clearly. I don't ever come up with 43 bullet points of things I want to accomplish. I'm laser focused on 2 or 3 things, and that's how, over the last 20 years of holding appointed or elected office, I come out with goals. I expect those goals to be met prior to me coming and running for re-election and asking to be sent back.
You get the next question.
Sure.
As a selectman, what do you see as the next 3 biggest challenges the town faces?
The next 3 biggest challenges. Well, I think for I guess the near future anyway, I don't know if our challenges are changing. I know that we're still dealing with, I've been pushing the downtown revitalization. This board has put their money where their mouth is, which is I like to say because people have been talking about that since I was a kid. But we're doing projects on Main Street, we're taking buildings, we're leaving options for expansion of parking. I think that's something that we're going to continue to see. As people left Main Street for the malls years ago, and now with Amazon and everything, they're looking to come back to their local stores and their local main streets. So I think that's a major challenge. I think immigration is always going to be an issue in the near future. So much of it has to be dealt with at the federal level, but here in Milford, we know we get affected by that. And I think that, we have to continue to be as Milford always has, be accepting, make sure that, that those folks that come here know what our rules and regulations are, because obviously we have a lot more, much more of a government presence than where they came from when it comes to housing and things of that nature. The third is probably just going to make sure, and this is probably the most important, is to maintain our fiscal responsibility. We have obviously an outstanding fiscal position. We're the envy of many towns, but as we all know, that takes a lot of work. Whether you're on the school committee, a finance committee member, or on the board of selectmen. The money we set aside for capital projects, the planning we do, the folks we tell no to for the first 3 years until we get to them, knowing how the process works, but that takes a lot of responsibility and a lot of accountability to hold the line, because we'd all like to say yes to everything. And a lot of towns do that and they pay for it. And figuratively as well as metaphorically. And I think that, to keep that fiscal control that we have is going to always have to be a priority.
John, what do you see as the 3 biggest challenges facing the selectmen and the town of Milford in the future?
Well, without getting into individual challenges initially, I think the biggest problem that we have right now is that we have not come up with an updated comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan that we have from 2003 addressed a number of the concerns that we've all had over the years, and everybody's been working sort of in a piecemeal fashion towards. And some of those are, in industrial development, fixing, or improving downtown, which is, on the top of a number of people's lists. But we have a comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2003 and really was never fully embraced by the leadership in this town. There's been so many aspects of that plan that have been ignored, and they may be being picked up here and there and sort of piecemeal again at this point. But I think we have a chance to shape where we're going in the next 10 to 20 years, and it has to be done through a comprehensive plan. And I know that the average person out there may not know what the comprehensive plan is. And I'll try and make this brief, a document that was developed in 2002 and adopted in 2003 with a number of planning professionals, professors from UMass, our town planner, our planning board, and a number of other individuals. And it looks at all of the problems that we had. Traffic, for example. There was a proposed alternate route that never really got explored or embraced, which would have most certainly alleviated some of the traffic problems. Downtown was a big part of the topic, preserving our open space, future housing units, development. All of that stuff is in a comprehensive plan. And as Will mentioned, our finances are in very good condition, but to really properly plan our finances, it needs to be done behind or in conjunction with this comprehensive plan. Now, some of the individual issues, certainly the stormwater management, which if it stays in full effect of what we have, the obligations that we will have to fulfill, will be a staggering amount of money. The water company's been talked about at length. I don't think that we really need to dive into that at this point, but there are a number of issues, but the biggest issue I see is that we don't have a plan. We had a plan that wasn't embraced, which means we don't have a plan now, and it's not something that can just quickly or easily be updated. It's something that'll take the same effort that it took in 2002 to develop, and that's what I think we need to focus on.
Okay. Next question. You both have brought up financial concerns. Profanity. I'm going to ask you. Those two words that I find the most profane in town hall, 2.5 override and debt exclusion. Comments, and do you ever see us using them?
Yeah, certainly comments. 2.5 override, I don't ever envision us needing or supporting a 2.5 override. Debt exclusion, the popular and easy answer is that I would never support that. But I've mentioned this here in the past, Al, that there are times when at the beginning of a project, such as the expense of Woodland School, that a town could, almost for insurance, as a safety precaution, vote to allow a debt exclusion in the future, which, if funds ever became really tight in the town, then rather than a 2.5 override that I don't think anybody would support, you could, as a town, vote for a debt exclusion, which would allow those extra tax funds to simply be used for that particular debt, such as the Woodland School. We didn't do it on that project. I believe it was our auditors that made us aware that it's something we should consider at the time. So in general, no, I'm not in favor of either, but there is a time to strongly consider it for such a major project as the Woodland School or whatever's coming up next.
Willie, profanity. Now remember, your mother will be watching this show, so when you use words like 2.5 and debt exclusion, you could get your mouth washed out with soap.
Absolutely. No, but I do agree, a debt exclusion is far better than a 2.5 override. However, in order for us to ever worry about that, we'd have to, as we've discussed in the past, we'd have to tax to the levy limit, which we're not doing. That's first and foremost. We obviously have, millions of dollars in funds set aside for capital projects and stabilization, and what a lot of people, commonly think of as a rainy day fund. And that was a huge reason that we were able to finance Woodland, which is a good example, because of the sheer size of the expense. But because we had so many years of planning, and we kept telling town meeting that we're putting all this money away for a reason. And I think that was important because even town meeting members were questioning us years back, saying, wait a minute, if you're putting all this money away, you're actually overtaxing us. So, and you remember all those, not floor fights, but just all of those discussions and presentations and making sure that,
why are you
that everyone knew.
expanding the stabilization fund?
Absolutely.
And we kept saying there's a school coming.
And it was great because we were saying that for 10 years. I mean, the fact I've been off the school committee for a number of years, and we were planning Woodland prior to me getting off, and now to see it built and everything, and the fact that we didn't have to have a debt exclusion or a 2.5 override, but you have to have that vision and that responsibility to know that if you take an endeavor on and you say we're going to set aside money for nearly a decade, not a lot of people have the ability to do that, and Milford needs to be very proud of themselves for having the fiscal responsibility to do so.
And it started again, because at the town meeting that we told everybody we've financed Woodland and we're all set, we immediately put $500,000 towards stabilization, and I got the same question.
Of course.
Isn't it over? I said, there's a school coming.
Absolutely.
Because hopefully in 8 or 10 years, the high school will be renovated. But you brought up a word, and since you get the next question to start, levy limit. I mean, people read, they see on TV a levy is something that keeps the rivers, but we talk about levy limits and taxing to the levy limit. So I want to ask both of you, since you're starting, define what a levy is, and then tell me your views on should we be taxing to the levy limit.
Well, again, and I think this is very important because a lot of us, we're all insiders here, the three of us, and I think what we have to always remember is to, be as colloquial and as clear spoken as possible. Levy limit is pretty much the maximum you can tax to. So if you max to if you limit to the maximum amount that you're allowed to by law, then you reach the cap without an override.
Taxing? When you say the levy limit, what's in the levy?
Everything. I mean, everything that we raise and appropriate, everything that we spend at town meeting, which is a whole nother discussion because a lot of people who are town meeting members even, and I'm kind of veering off course here because we just dealt with it with our tax bills. Even people that serve as town meeting members say, geez, my taxes went up this much. And like, we have to clearly correlate that to how much we spent at town meeting. You want your taxes to be less, you have to spend less and raise less and appropriate less. But again, if your credit limit on your Amex is $1,000, you can borrow up to $1,000 or you can choose not to. We often choose not to. We've chosen not to now for supersedes me, many, many years now. And really, it's not just the benefit of the single year of doing that. It's over the last 15 years that local government hasn't grown by millions and millions and millions of dollars. Because if you borrow up to that levy limit and then you spend up to the levy limit and then you do that again and you tax, you're
compounding.
Yeah, you're compounding the spending, and what that actually results in is the size of government.
So is it safe to say the levy limit, I mean, I call it how many times local government can put their hands in my pocket, but housing, your real estate taxes, your excise tax, any tax that you're paying to the town of Milford
yes,
gets pulled together, whether you're a business or a homeowner, into what's called the levy. Now, back to my question. Should we be raising to the levy limit?
No.
Why?
Well, I think, again, history proves that it's been beneficial for us. Never mind we give that difference back to the tax rate, which doesn't necessarily equal to a huge savings per every taxpayer here in town. But again, exponentially and over the years, that's a large amount of money that you're not being compounded on. And I say it's also a benefit because I say this all the time, and I've been part of the process both as a selectman, a school committee member, a FinCom member, and a town meeting member, and going before you guys and just on the FinCom, and justifying for things, and sometimes getting in heated arguments and trying to justify why we need certain things. But again, it comes down to that restraint and everything. And I don't think we're really going without anything, or at least over the last 3 years as a selectman, when I've asked folks that, well, what are we going without? Because if we're going without something, and we're not raising to the levy limit just to say we are, then that needs to be a discussion. But if we're giving the folks and our kids in the schools and everything and our employees what they need based on what's getting asked of us, then there's no reason just to raise to the maximum because we can.
John, should we be raising to the levy limit?
No, we shouldn't. And I agree pretty much with most, or if not all, of what Will said. We don't want to tax to the levy limit for a number of reasons. First of all, we need to leave some breathing room in case there's some unexpected increases, in our expenses in subsequent years. If health insurance goes up unexpectedly or a higher percentage than we can handle, if we tax to the levy limit, then we're looking for that nasty word that you used earlier, which is, override. So no, I don't think anybody. I think we all share that common goal to not raise to the, not tax to the levy limit. And again, as Will mentioned, and I expect, even though we're both here as candidates in a debate, we're not going to disagree on everything. We're going to disagree on some points or procedures or how I would affect some change versus he. But it's what I want to look at, and what I do look at is what are we offering for services, and what's the trade-off? If we add such and such service, how much does that increase what we're taxing, and is it justified? There's some things we may want to add, and it may be worth, raising and appropriating slightly more money. But it's looking at the value. We don't want to keep taxes as low as possible, because if we keep them as low as possible, we're going to lose services. And we don't want to provide unlimited services, because then the taxes are unjustly high. So like so many things in life, it's a balance, and it's weighing out these options and decisions and, trying to do what's best for the residents.
Continue on with the question. There's been some heated debates when we've run surpluses. In the past years, we've been running 2.5, all the way up to $5 million in an extraordinary year of surplus. Now, a lot of people immediately say, well, you taxed me too high. And we try and explain that, okay, we're just over $100 million company here. So if we predict our budget and come in at 97, 98% of plan, I mean, if I came home with a 98 on my report card, I don't think, if it was your daughter or your son, you'd say, well, where's the other two? But realistically, you're pretty happy. That leaves $2-3 million on normal years as a surplus. And the heated debate is always, do you give it back? Or do you spend it? Or do you take somewhere in between? What's your opinion?
I think you take it somewhere in between. That's been our practice. We've had very prudent financial planning in this town for a number of years, thanks to the hard work of the FinCom and our department heads and our elected officials. So yeah, the answer is somewhere in between, which we have done. We've given a certain amount of dollars each year in recent history back to the taxpayers, and then we've used some to fortify our stabilization accounts, and it's a balance. Of course, we can't budget to the penny and take the chance of coming up short at the end of the fiscal
Actually,
year.
that's against the law.
Yeah.
You can't not overspend. It'd be nice if there was a little printing press down in Milford Town Hall, but you can't print money, so you have to have a balanced budget by law.
Yeah.
Willie.
No, well said. I mean, I think it is a balancing act, and I think that goes into what we've been talking about these last couple of questions having to do with finances. I think Milford does an incredibly good job of balancing what's right and what's fair, and if there is a surplus, then something should go back to the tax rate. But we also make sure that we put away to stabilization and that we make our large purchases and we go through the capital process, capital planning process. Again, I think that balancing act, though, is what is so unique to Milford. And I think that, from the Board of Selectmen to the Finance Committee and everyone else, I mean, school committee, again, I talk about is one of the most important board in town. I mean, they have the biggest amount of spending, and one can argue that they have the most important job over our 4,200 kids. So, but it takes everybody to take part in that balancing act. Because if you have one department, especially a big one, that wants to go rogue, it obviously affects the entire overall budget.
I think the technical answer to that is no. They want to go rogue, yes, no. One thing that people get confused at, we talk about we haven't raised 2.5% because we're allowed by law, which is town meeting.
Yes.
We're not allowed to do anything. I mean, as I joke about the Finance Committee, my mind being the most influential, powerless people involved in the process.
But very influential.
Well, very powerless. I mean, we get one whole vote out of 200.
Yes.
But, you hear that, okay, we only increased our spend by 1.5% last year. And sometimes people say, but my tax bill went up 6% or 5%. And they don't understand the whole dual taxation program in Milford. Can you explain it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the dual tax rate, but it's also, we can get into the assessments of your property values versus, there's all of these different components that affect your bill. Now, I don't blame folks. They don't want to talk about tax rates. They really don't. We'll explain it, but they don't want to talk about tax rates. They don't want to talk about assessments. They want to talk about why their bill went up $150 a quarter over last year.
Is my check I'm writing this year bigger than last year? Yeah. If it is, I'm not a happy person.
Absolutely. And I think, again, most people now, and all your viewers probably know by now that we have a dual tax rate and have for some time. And, our commercial business owners pay 1.5 times what our residents do. And that's, by the way, I don't say that lightly. To own a business in a town I mean, you'll be able to speak to it far better than I would from a personal level, but you know, that's a big commitment to have a business here in Milford, and I think that's why it's so important that we offer as much services as we do to residents, to our businesses, whether it's plowing. I mean, regardless of what we can do, we have to be respectful to the fact that our businesses, large and small, are paying a lot more to do business in Milford than they are elsewhere.
Should we be?
Well, to be honest with you, there's no choice anymore. Yes, legally you can take a vote.
I was
and
say,
you
wait a
can
minute,
change it.
there's a choice. You can
But-
say no.
But we all have discussed what that would do to our residential tax bills and to our residents at this point after all these years of having a dual tax rate. To equal that out, as we've discussed, you've discussed with many candidates and office holders on your shows, because I'm one of your viewers, that we would be taxing a lot of people right out of their homes. So to go backwards, even though you can, I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon.
What do you say to people? Because I've had some heated discussions where they say if they can't afford it, they don't have to live in Milford.
Well, to that, I haven't heard that directly, but the fact that you said that, I kind of take some offense to that.
Some.
Because I'm trying to be polite and diplomatic here. I think we should be doing whatever we can to keep people in their homes, especially our elderly population. There was an article in the Globe today, actually, that talked about, you know, towns do have an ability to take care of folks once they're 65 and older, and that's something that Milford hasn't really looked at. We kind of offer other services to help people with their tax bills. But I think, you know, especially as people are living longer, they want to stay in their homes. I certainly hope that, you know, our moms can stay in their homes as long as they want to. I hope that for everyone's mother and father. And I think as a leader in town, we have to do whatever it takes to make sure we can at least have that discussion to make sure that
I'll hold my
benefit
opinion
allows.
till after John has his, because I've had very strong opinions on
I'm sure you
that
have.
subject. But John, you're kind of in a unique position because you're one of the people that we double tax. You know, Erickson Electric doesn't pay the same rate as John Erickson.
Well, to be clear, Erickson Electric doesn't own any commercial property in town, so
Yeah, but don't you rent property?
we don't, but I was going to get to that. But I do rent property, and so as part of my rental fees, the dual tax rate is certainly
I mean, if I'm charging your
certainly a consideration.
building owner 50% more, I'm assuming he's not saying, oh, I like that John guy, I'll just eat
Right.
the difference.
It's all part of the cost of doing business, and it does increase my cost of doing business. But I think there's no way that we could ever justify going to an equal tax rate at this point, just like Will said. The added costs would certainly force some residents out of their homes. Some residents are struggling now paying their tax bills. They're on fixed incomes. You know, when it goes up only $150 a quarter or whatever the number may be, that's a burden. That's an absolute burden on,
So what
on
would
many
you say
residents.
to somebody if they came up to you, like at town meeting, you know, we're sitting on the table across from you guys, and they say, well, if they can't afford to live in Milford, maybe they should move.
Well, we certainly don't want to see people move out of Milford that want to live in Milford. But we have to look at the higher level and the big picture of what cuts can we make that will help lower our tax rate. Again, it's to the choices and the decisions and the weighing in that we spoke about earlier. And, you know, how much will that save and at what expense? I mean, you know, we really want to look at what's good for the greater good of this community. And you can't pull out any one individual and say, well, we have to do this and that because such and such is going to be really burdened by this decision if we don't. So you're never going to please all of the residents on any particular issue. You know, we've discussed this before. A lot of times as a town official, you've got that, you know, typical referee 51-49% satisfaction ratio. But, you know, all you can do is get out there and look at your options and make your decisions based on how you think it'll best serve the greater community, in my mind.
Well, I'll tell you,
Excuse me.
I have a very strong opinion when somebody will say that to me, because I'll look and say, maybe you don't belong in Milford if you think that way, because when you think about some of the elderly who are living on Social Security, God dang it, they built Milford. The reason I have what I have, the reason this town is so special for my kids is that a lot of these people who are living on $1,200, $1,300 a month, when they were young, they built this place.
Absolutely.
And I'll be danged if I'll ever think that I have more of a right to live here, or anybody, or you, versus the people who built the town and set us up. So, it really, that's one of the things that bothers me. When people start saying, well, we can afford to live here if they can't. Well, then maybe you don't belong. I don't want to be elitist or, exclusionary, but I really think we owe the people who built this town.
Well, Al, I think you're being the exact polar opposite of elitist when you have that perspective. So,
thank you. One of the things that has been a hot button, you're next, is the whole idea of a mass transport, a bus system in Milford. What's your opinion on the bus? Could you explain what the bus system is in Milford, and then what's your opinion?
The bus system, as I understand it now, is we're part of the, what's the acronym?
the regional transit.
MWRTA LMNOP.
Metro West Regional Transport Authority, or whatever it is. But yeah, so we now for 2 years, I believe, we've been part of that system. There's, the last I was in tune were 14 stops throughout Milford, and then it connects to a stop in Holliston, which ultimately connects to Framingham and gets you into pretty much anywhere where public transportation will take you in Massachusetts. And, that's something that was, pretty well debated at town meeting a few years ago when the money was appropriated for it. The initial cost was only $50,000. I was completely on board with trying it and seeing how how successful the program was. There were a number of people advocating for other programs and spending not the 50, but whatever the total amount would have been, 250, because of the Chenal grant offset 75, and the state gave, I think, 125.
Yeah, but I always love that, because that gets you a certain amount of time. And I always say, look, think about this program
It's
as
seed
$250,000. It's seed money, because a year or two from now, the bill comes due, and you won't have the grants. So the real question is it a worthwhile program in your mind?
Honestly, Al, I don't have enough information on the ridership right now. If I had to make that decision whether to completely support it or choose to abandon it, I don't have all that information. But it's something we have to look at closely. I know the ridership isn't great, but how long does it take to develop, and what are the projections? But as you said, now is when we're paying. We're paying in fiscal 19 back that first $50,000, and the next 125 the following year. And if we get out of the system, that's more real dollars rather than coming off the cherry sheet fund. So
now, do you think people support public transportation in Milford and question the implementation, or do they question, should we have public transportation?
I think it's a combination. I think some people question whether we should have it, and others, I don't think there's a real consensus, a firm consensus on any of it from the people that I've talked to.
But from an Erickson perspective, should we have public transportation in Milford?
At this point, yes. But the question's always going to be at what expense, and what else could we do by either not raising those funds, or what else could we do with those funds? So the short answer, if this was a yes or no on a test, yes, Erickson supports it.
Willie, you've heard of public transportation.
Yes. And I think in Milford, and I'm a yes. John brought up a lot of good points. The ridership isn't maxed out by any stretch. I just met with Scott Crisafulli a couple weeks ago regarding this. He was coming to one of our meetings to give an update on the Transportation Committee. But the ridership is going in the right direction. So that's an overall positive. But we also have to look at it from a different viewpoint. We have we have 22 special needs kids just out of the high school alone that are using that public transportation at that stop. They're getting to work. They're supporting themselves. They're not trying to get a parent who's at work too, trying to get them to a ride to their workplace. And I think as a town, much like Milford, I think overall people probably do support it, even if they're not going to ride it. And I think there's a lot of that where, a lot of folks in our position aren't going to have to use it, or certainly aren't dependent on it. But we can't forget those that are. And I think that goes a long way because what we should want for folks, whether regardless of where they are on the spectrum of age or abilities, but also speaking specifically to folks with disabilities who know they can't get a license, we still want them to be productive members of society. So we should be doing whatever it takes to encourage them to get on a bus, go to the Big Y, go to Fortune Boulevard, wherever it is, a restaurant, get a job, come home, have that pride, choose to stay in Milford. Because that's another reason some folks would have to leave Milford if they can't get from point A to point B. So I think it's important from a social aspect, a social justice aspect, but also, we can afford to do it, so we should. But one thing I certainly agree with that John mentioned was, but we should never stop looking at it. And I know we don't have to worry about that because you folks on the Finance Committee certainly go through those numbers, and just as we do, and we get reports and we have the committee come to us and present how the ridership is doing and everything of that nature. But I think for our size town, not a lot of people are surprised.
And when we had Jen Walsh come forward, and she brought kids in who said, I use the bus.
Yes.
And their parents saying, there's not a lot that we can do, but something like this allows my child to feel more independent and have that sense of self-esteem. Kind of hard to say no, because obviously we can afford it.
Yes.
The question is the bus, the circular route, the right implementation? Should we have a Milford Uber where you call down to senior center somewhere and
like a dial-a-ride.
Like a dial-a-ride.
The only thing is with those, and I mean, I deal with it at the state level, and I think, it's just nice to know that if you go here at this particular time, you're going to get picked up. Those you can get as close as possible and do your best to make an appointment, but again, you know how long it takes for us to get across town. When you're dealing with that, and again, by being part of a regional transit authority, they're in charge of the vehicles, they're in charge of the maintenance, they're hiring the drivers, we're not carrying them, we're not paying for the benefits, we're not doing any of that. It's certainly a good chunk of change, but again, you have to look at the overall aspect. I mean, the Transportation Committee designed that route and that loop because we were talking about bringing a single bus in. We're not bringing, some towns have more services through their regional transit authority than we choose to, because we weren't going to go all in on a huge investment in public transportation so you could get anywhere you want across town.
Without knowing if it's going to be worthwhile.
Exactly. But again, I'm biased. I have a child that may never have a driver's license. And I know that still, just like I had to at 14, 15 years old, I'm going to be looking for Caleb to get a job. So I'm hoping that services like that are
one of the couple hundred.
Absolutely.
When you mentioned it before, we have, when we refer to our kids, there's 4,200 of our kids.
Absolutely.
That we have to watch out for as if they're our kids. So.
And we also have a lot of able-bodied students getting on the bus as well to go to their jobs.
How appropriate that you're starting this question. If I said water company, seriously? I mean,
it's been an interesting ride, I'll tell you that.
What is going on, and where do you see the selectmen taking it?
Well, it's interesting.
And I didn't let you off the hook. I'm coming back to you for this.
As the second to newest member on the board, and then Mike, who joined us a year ago, we both ran saying, "Don't touch that." Why would we want that? then we get part of a lot of the talks, and I'm kind of at a disadvantage, so to speak, because there's a lot I still can't say. But what we can talk about is there was just an overabundance of information on why, if we can afford it, why we probably and should have control of it. It's amazing to me that being over the last 3 years, the second most amount of calls I've gotten under any category is water department related. And we have no control over the water company other than personal relationships.
People are looking saying, you made your case, we gave you $60-odd million.
Yep.
Would you get on with it already?
I wish we could. All I can say is the town of Milford never did anything but continue to bargain in good faith. I think that's pretty diplomatic.
Still a good idea?
I believe so. I honestly think at this day and age, we need to have control of our water supply. And I know that that was not my position 3 years ago, but I've learned a lot. I've heard a lot. And you know, and just like through town meeting, even though we had great debate and great back and forth, the vast majority of people think when it comes to water, maybe the days of having it privately owned are behind us. And quite honestly, as we move ahead with the DPU and it going back into an asset type of sale, if we take it that way, if it all pans out through that whole process, it will probably be more beneficial in the long run.
I mean, realistically, a lot of people don't understand. We don't want to buy the water company, because then all the liability and all the history falls on us. We just want to buy the pieces of the water company.
Right, and that's been the issue because we won't take responsibility for things
So I
of
don't
the
want to
past.
find out that I owe you $100 because 10 years ago somebody did bad things.
Exactly.
All I want to know is I own the building, I own the pumps. John, if somebody came up to you and said, okay, you were in town hall for a while, water company, what's going on?
Well, what's going on is what I believe I know, and you know, Will is certainly in the know, but there's some confidential information that he can't share that I'm not privy to. But you know, we had an agreement for a simple stock purchase, and that fell through, and now we're looking at an asset acquisition. We had to file with the SJC in Massachusetts, and the DEP will now be setting the value of the assets. That could be 63 million, that could be 60, that could be 70. If everything during this whole process went well, then it should be near the 63. But it could be more, it could be less, and if it's more, we'd need to, I think, go back to town meeting to raise the additional funds or approve the additional spending. I feel today what I've always felt about taking over the Milford Water Company. If everything unfolds perfectly, it's going to be a benefit to Milford, but there's a big risk. You know, we've never obviously managed a water company, owned a water company, so there's bigger risk than reward, but there is the potential for the reward, and if everything is implemented properly, I do think it would be a benefit to own the water.
Another one. This one's for you to start, so maybe you can define Middle School East.
Middle School East.
Okay, I've heard everything in the world about it, and I drive by it every day, and it's still there empty. What is going on?
So as most people out there watching know, the school committee declared it surplus as of June of last year, which means that, or June 30th of last year, it means that the control of it transferred to the Board of Selectmen. We approved at town meeting for an RFP to be developed, which it was. The request for proposal went out, I don't know if it was November or December, with a late January deadline. A dozen or so, give or take, a handful, people requested the RFP, and we only got one bid. I think that number may be a little misleading, because as an individual, I requested the RFP. I had no interest clearly in bidding on it, but I wanted to read it. So in order to read it, I think I'm counted as one of those dozen that
requested the information.
that applied to receive the RFP. So the RFP came back, and the Board of Selectmen accepted the proposal from the developer for $115,000, I believe. And he has two options proposed. He can either do whatever. He can either take the route with that building that he's allowed by right with our current zoning, which is essentially knock the building down and put in some type of retail or professional space, which is part of his proposal. His preferred option is to turn it into over 55 housing. So with that, a zoning amendment's required. That needs to be drafted, it needs to be brought to town meeting, and it needs a 2/3 vote to be approved. And at that point, that would allow residential uses in the downtown districts, the CA and the CB zoning districts, as they're referred to. CA goes basically from the Tom building to the post office, and CB extends further down to Sacred Heart Church. I think that's a good example of what we've missed as opportunities that's been a part of our comprehensive plan that I mentioned earlier, bringing residential units to the downtown areas, especially on the uppermost floors. So that's what's on the table for Middle School East. I do agree wholeheartedly that over 55 housing in the downtown areas would be very beneficial. I think it's a great proposal that's been brought by the developer, but I'm a little disappointed that we needed a private developer to spur this action by the town when it's something that's been in some form or other discussed since 2003. Driving a little further with Middle School East, I'm not sure, if I were on the Board of Selectmen at that point, I don't believe I would have accepted that proposal. Receiving only one proposal, I probably would have asked for it to go out to bid again to see what other interest there was, why there was only one. Maybe that could be, you could get some idea or inclination on what the interest was if you look and see that, who the individuals were that obtained the proposals. John Erickson had no interest in buying that building, but John Erickson had an interest in reading the request for proposal and see what was involved. So, and to go a little bit further, something I've been talking about for a few years, I don't think that building was studied as to how it may fit in for municipal use in the future. I know there was the Middle School East reuse study. It certainly didn't look hard at municipal use. I know none of the department heads were consulted in it for what their needs are. I know that we are literally out of space at the town hall for, in our current configuration. We're paying for off-site record storage. We have, if there are any additional staff members added to the town hall, the selectmen have indicated they want to potentially, bring more help to one department or another, or create a new department.
Bunk beds.
We literally don't have the space, and I'm not saying that we would have reused Middle School East in its current carnation for that use, but we didn't explore it at all. It's a perfect location. It's one that we'll never get back. So for that reason, I really don't agree with their decision to move forward with, selling it for that amount without exploring other options.
Willie,
Sure.
Middle School East.
Yep, and and I think this is probably a really good discussion point for us. I was disappointed that we only got one bid back, because I certainly, and John, if you wanted a copy of the RFP, I can't believe someone just didn't give it to you, rather than you having to formally request it, so I apologize for that. You shouldn't have had to do that.
Well, that was the process.
There were plenty of copies going around. There was a public document. But, so I'm sorry for that. But as for getting a qualified bid back, when I was on the school committee back, it probably was 03 or 04, Paul Mazzucchelli and I did an interview with Ed Thompson on the radio talking about the future of Middle School East then, because it was already on our plan to move away from that going within a couple of years. And we talked about having it town hall annex space, keeping the gym, central office. I think at that point we were even talking about Shining Star, using that building. And I honestly thought that when the school department asked to hold on to it for that year, that's what you guys were going to come back with. You didn't. You did your due diligence, and you guys, however, you came to figure out that you didn't have a purpose for that building. I know that I certainly didn't want to be a landlord of that building for too long. Growing up with the boarded up Stacy building for most of my life, if not all of it, I didn't want to see that again on Main Street. When I first got on the school committee, and this is the history of it, our buildings were literally falling apart. Kids, if you remember in the high school back then, were wearing their hats, and Mr. Basicha called me the day I got on because he was wearing a hat and a winter coat and gloves. We didn't have a facilities director. A lot of things needed to happen. That became the priority. We are generally not, historically, not the best landlords. And to back that up, for the months that this has been under the control of the town, the pipes burst. Even a building that's tight, sitting vacant for 6, 7, 8 months, looks awful. It's literally falling apart. So it's not necessarily the $115,000 that we're getting from Mr. Loberser, even though the day he gets it, he starts paying taxes on that. So
That's more interesting than the $100,000.
it's on the tax rolls as soon as he purchases it. But also, that report from the middle school lease committee, I mean, regardless of the use, it was going to be a $5 to $6 million investment. So you have to also put that into the equation of the cost avoidance for the town. So for that much money, can we come up with something else if we need additional space? It's a ton of money. This gets on the tax rolls, and never mind the fact that the plan that Mr. Loberser presented to us, the building looks beautiful. And I hope he gets the zoning change. And I know the planning board is looking to look at the whole downtown district, which I completely respect and agree with. But we shouldn't hold up one project. I mean, I would love to have this plan that everyone follows, but in town government, you have all the fiefdoms, and getting everyone together is a major part of what the town went through back in '03. If we have to take it a chunk at a time, for progress' sake, I will take it a chunk at a time. And I think knowing that if we can get 55 and older, we're going to get foot traffic. We're going to deal with some stuff on downtown that's just going to blossom and evolve, with additional parking down here and getting rid of a couple of those collapsed buildings on Central Street. And this is all part of the whole dynamic. So I think
now,
when something comes up like this, we have to take it.
Willie, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Again, I've served this town. I think I've served it well. I love it. I love being a part of it. I started serving at 18 years old, so for the last 24 years, I've held a position in the town of Milford, whether elected or appointed. I don't look to be a selectman forever. Just like school committee, I did my 3 terms, and at that point, I realized it was time to move on. I was born here, but I chose to stay here and raise my family here. This town has adopted my wife, and she feels like she's been a major part of this community as well. And again, my son Caleb is loved, and like I always joke, I used to be Will Kincaid, then I was Lisa's husband, and now I'm Caleb's dad. And for whatever it takes, I hope people give me another shot, and I'd really like to serve 3 more years.
John, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, Al, I think you should vote for me because of what I've demonstrated in my 15 or 16 years of service to the town of Milford, my approach, my independence, my integrity. And I think while we may both share a lot of common goals for this town, we have drastically different approaches on how to get there. I think I've proven that I work collaboratively with all the department heads in town. I look to rely on them for their expertise. I look to do this as a team. I really don't embrace the approach of doing one thing at a time. I think that's more of you're reacting, you're not proactive. I think I just bring an entirely different approach on how to accomplish tasks in Milford than what we have on the Board of Selectmen now.
Well, I thank you both. As I've said, I tip my hat to anybody who's willing not just to say we should be better, we should do different things, but to stand up and say, put me in, coach, let me try and make it better. So thank you, regardless of how it turns out, for standing up and being willing to help the town of Milford.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al.
And as always, I never will ask you to vote for a specific candidate, regardless of how I feel, but I will beg you to vote. Part of voting is becoming an educated voter. Get to know the candidates, both selectmen, the myriad of people who are running for school committee. God, that could be a PhD thesis in itself. But it's important because those two groups, I mean, the school committee, anybody who's had high school kids knows you have to beg to get an hour or two a day. I mean, even now after college, I drive my ungrateful offspring number 2 back to Boston. She's never believed that the train goes both ways. The train brings her to Milford.
She wants to spend time with you, Al.
Well, yeah, but see, that's why my darling bride and I always debate who takes her back, is who gets the 50 minutes to actually talk with her. So, you know, the school committee sets the policies that dictate 6 to 8 hours a day of how our kids develop. The selectmen set the policies and the direction for where we're taking Milford as a town. Critical, absolutely critical decisions. And we all have the ability. And I guess today it's more appropriate at this show, but years ago when people said, I don't know if my vote matters, 13 votes separated a candidate. It's amazing. In an entire town election, 13 people could have made the difference if they didn't stay home and got out and voted, or they could have doubled up. But it was only 13 votes out of 2,800 that were cast. It's amazing to me. So, as always, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than today at the center of the universe. And if nothing else, thank these people as you see them who are willing to stand up and help. Thank you. Good night.